Hi, this is another interesting video about some feet talking, and I I don't mean to be this is it might be creative to do a video of feet talking, but there's actually a couple of different reasons that I'm filming my feet, and one of them is because I had an idea that occurred to me, and I wanted to capture it while I still had the energy of the idea, because sometimes it's not just so much the idea that occurs to us, but it's also the energy of the idea that would allow the idea to flow, but also to be enunciated and articulated. And I also want to make a little revision to a video because I had another video, and also please pardon the airplane. There's some type of change to the patterns and the flight routing today where I live, where they've actually been flying incessantly where I live, and that's not normal. But so, but I think in another video I was talking about the terms, the Sanskrit terms of divani, which is like a degree of conscious in India. It's been appreciated that you have different dimensions of conscious in different degrees of conscious within a human being. And I've also made videos saying that I think we could appreciate that without reaching too far for humans. If you just think about some people would say, can you think on your feet? Or some people would say, weaken your knees. Or some people would say, it's not dancing if it's not putting your hips into it. Or some people would say, well, he was thinking with his this and that before he got in trouble. Or some people would say, you're talking out your anus. Or some people would say, make your decision with your gut. Or some people would say that they got chills in their spine. That one might be good or bad. Some people might say that one's got a lot of gall. That might actually refer to like your the different humors, like your bile in the different fluids in your body. Or some people would say it makes your blood, something makes your blood boil. Or some people might say that you have a lot of heart. And then I think in the greatest sense, at least in India, in Sanskrit, which I'm being inspired by, they would, according to Arthur Avalon, they would actually recognize the heart as a seat of consciousness to settle that. But then sometimes if you're maybe intimidated or you're scared, you might have a certain feeling in your throat. Or sometimes in India in Sanskrit, they say that you have different degrees of speech. So you have like a causal speech, the cause of speech. Then you have a subtle speech, with like kind of talking under your breath that you somewhat can't help, and that reaches up to being enunciated out of your mouth. And what comes out of your mouth might be a combination of the type of food you've been eating. So when a person is under the influence of different things, they may talk differently, more coherently, very coherently, so coherently as to be startling, or like slurred or angry. And that also has to do with how the different substances are affecting that normal speech of the tongue that is going on. And then in the Holy Bible, they talk about how difficult is it to bridle the tongue. And then there's more degrees in that. Some people would say this one's too cerebral, or some people would say that like you have then the highest degree, at least in Sanskrit, would be like the crown of the head, like the front of the eyes. Some people would say like seeing with the third eye. So it can be appreciated that there's a lot of that consciousness might be like on a tier or a grade within the human being. I talked to a person at a gas station recently, and he thought that he was very convincing, and I was convinced by him that the more profound of which would be the gut in his mind, that you have about 8, 9, 10 pounds of he was referring to fungus in the gut as being perhaps that fungus is the conception and engine of our present iteration of existence, predating even trees, plants, and bacteria. By and large, far and away, by and large, would be fungus, according to him. And that it's beyond what we can appreciate in terms of intelligence. And I had there was a pharmacist that I worked where I was a clerk for a few years, one of the most stable and enjoyable years of my life. I was just living with my mother and my brother then. Some of the best years for me, and even in terms of respect in the community. There's very affluent people in that community of a different kind of like old wealth in that community. But it wasn't like a specifically redlined or racist community, but it was just a it was a it was it was it was a very well-to-do area, just in terms of its history and the type of people that live there. But I was having respect there by being friendly and stable. And I actually had some of my most even though I'm a person of color, some of the most respect I got was in that community of a well-to-do. But there's a pharmacist there, and he was saying that if you appreciate the human body, where he had studied the body to a fair degree, probably not the same as a medical doctor, but close. And he was saying that you just simply can't engage with the human body and not appreciate a higher form of consciousness, or at least organization. And I flirted with different medical training to a lower degree over different years, and it was like that, where you just, if you study the body, the main thing you learn by studying the body is just to respect the body and not overdo anything, or especially not underdo things. Like, you don't get the right nutrition and things start to fail, cascading, just like things fall apart financially when things aren't making progress financially. But all I meant to say is that consciousness, the more convincing concept of consciousness is a form of fungus, according to one person I talked to. But all I meant to say is um, so and I was saying, but Divani would be one of those, is the capacity for speech as being a degree of consciousness approaching a deity in terms of how profound it is, and it's in people, and is in India. But then there's also Saraswati, which is like a certain spiritual gift, or it's called a siddhi. And I think in that tradition, your spiritual gifts are a function of different quests, that is sadhana, that is spiritual disciplines and undertakings, and arduous paths of cultivating self-culture and morality that amount to a giftedness, both in your present iteration of life and further iterations of life forms that have been influenced by your choices and efforts in different iterations of life, prior to or maybe after one iteration. And from that point, that's called a siddhi, and Saraswati is one of those, which is a combination of insight, but also the ability to enunciate that. And in that video, a couple of series back, I was struggling for the term for like a higher contemplation of just simple insight or channeling of insight. But then I remembered there's a term called dhyana, and I think that's a word that there may not be a word that you can translate that into English. You might be able to approach it like we're talking, like I'm doing, but there might not actually be a corresponding term in English that English speakers would be familiar with, unless they're bilingual or bicultural, like with Sanskrit or some of your cultures in India. But that might be close to like a higher form of contemplation, where it's not meditate. According to Osho, dhyana is not meditation in itself, but it's akin to meditation in its sublime form of a contemplation, no less than maybe insight and channeling. So I had an idea come to me like that I'm going to attempt with the next video. But when you get into that state of mind, you're very subtle to energy. And I have neighbors. I'm now in an area that's a little bit it's an area that's respected as being a well-to-do, stable area in the city where I live, where the city that I live can have very different dynamics as you cross certain streets or go to certain regions that are not very far geographically. But the area I'm in is somewhat respected, and I got a footing there because of a history that I had at another building where I grew up at, that was inherited by a latter landlord that had property in different areas of the city, and that person got me into this place at a decent rate. But all I meant to say is that a lot of my neighbors they're not very willing to form relationships whatsoever. They're very, it's very segregated. The neighborhood is segregated, but also the very units in the neighbors themselves are segregated. And actually, the where I live at, the culture itself is like that a lot. It's not necessarily segregated in terms of race or ethnicity, but it's a more subtle and profound form of segregation that's maybe akin to how acceptable are you, how accepted by acceptedness are you, but then also maybe what you do for a living and what you do in life. There's very sophisticated means of redlining and segregation where I live, but also it's not good energy where I'm at. So I had to come outside, because sometimes I have neighbors that we don't even have to be talking, but I can just get poor vibes even through the walls with like dogs barking and stuff like that. So I knew that energy might compromise the type of video that I'm trying to make. So I came outside, but I didn't want to just blast my neighborhood, obviously online. But so that's also why I'm filming my feet. But then also the subject I'm going to attempt, I wouldn't want to necessarily put my face with it because I'm going to try some heavy statements.